It now gives me not only pleasure but honor to introduce State Representative Long Tran. For those of you who may not be familiar, first of all, Long is my state representative, and I'm very proud to have him as a state representative because he's on the ball. In the Georgia State Legislature, there is only one Vietnamese American state congressperson, and that is Long Tran. He is a true friend of the AVVBA, and it seems like wherever I go, if it's to represent the AVVBA and it's with the Vietnamese community in some way, shape, or form, there he is again. And he's here today. It's splendid. So allow me to introduce him as not only our state representative and just a good guy, but my friend, Long Tran.
Thank you, Art and AVVBA, for having me here today. Art actually gave me this invitation a few months ago, but most politicians, we just put the event on our calendar and kind of forget about it. And I get this text from Art on Sunday, and he's like, are there any picture slides you want to give with your speech? And I thought about it. I'm like, maybe. But then I started doing all of the things that I needed to do this weekend, and I never got around to collating the pictures. And part of the reason for that is I have a philosophy when I come to an event. It's to be brief and be gone. I looked at Art's email, and he said, please speak for 25 to 30 minutes. Well, I've never asked to be long at an event. And so I'm going to do my best to talk on a variety of topics. It'll probably be about 15 minutes and then take some questions and answers. It's quite an interesting time we're living in, but there are some repeats in history. Yesterday was actually the second anniversary of my dad's passing, so he's been on my mind the last few days. He was a South Vietnamese helicopter pilot. He flew for the Squadron 219, King Bees. They were trained out of Hunter's Air Force Base. Are there any helicopter pilots who were trained down in Hunter's Air Force Base? There's one. Yep. And did anyone get rescued by those pilots in this room? From the club? So those pilots were considered Special Forces pilots. They flew in and rescued American soldiers out of zones that they were basically disavowed, where we couldn't send in our own U.S. helicopter force to pull soldiers out. And so these pilots grew a reputation of becoming one of the most skilled helicopter squadrons in the world. And I'm going to talk about, well, I'm going to bounce back and forth a little bit. The reason my dad and his evacuations lay heavy on my mind is 2 weeks ago, Israel struck Iran, Iran retaliated. And I was in DC at the time, and within hours I started getting phone calls and text messages saying, hey, I've got family in Israel, I'd like to get them home. And part of the reason people reached out to me is in 2023, after Hamas attacked Israel, we had Americans that were stuck and they needed to get back home because no one knew how big of a conflict that was going to become. Back then, the airspace wasn't shut down yet. This time, the airspace was shut down. I happened to be in DC at Amazon when this happened, and I went straight to the State Department because in 2023, when this happened, when Hamas attacked, the State Department was the first place I called, and they assigned me a contact that I could call at any time, give them updates, get questions answered, as I got information of Jewish families from my district. telling me where locations of their family members or friends were, I would relay that to the State Department and Senator John Ossoff's office. This time, though, I went down to the State Department, and they said, we can't help you. We've had over 700 staff cut. Our budget has been decimated. We can't help you. This was frustrating. So went back to my hotel, drafted up a social media post, basically copying everything I learned from 2 years earlier and threw it out on social media, basically telling people this is what you need to fill out with the State Department, the embassy, if you hadn't done it online yet. And then email Senator Ossoff if you're here in Georgia. And these are the 3 evacuation companies that I know historically have evacuated American civilians out of the Middle East. And then you can also reach out to me as well. And I didn't think anyone would take me up on it. There's a feature on your cell phone called Find My, where you can find your friends. And so you could share your location. Pretty soon, people started sharing their location with me to my phone. And next thing I know, I had like 70 people that I could see where they're at. And, but that was the social media post that I put out probably 4 or 5 hours after Iran responded and Israel shut down airspace. And even now, airspace is very limited. If you want to get a flight out of Israel, despite the ceasefire, there's less than a dozen flights a day, and each flight has less than 50 passengers on it. So I've still got around 20 families I'm tracking in Israel, trying to get them back. Some of them have medical conditions. Luckily, there's good access to medication in Israel, but we're working on it. Anyways, it actually took the State Department 5 days after I put my social media posts for them to post anything online, telling people what to do. And even then, what they were explaining to people was very limited. And so the Monday after, we had our first group evacuated. It was a film delegation from Georgia, and we were able to get them connected with a group in Florida called Grable. And they had to go through Jordan. And when I was talking to these folks and families, I had to make it very clear. It's ultimately going to be your choice, because I can't tell you if the safest thing is to stay in a bomb shelter. It was wild. I'm on the phone with someone, I'm watching CNN, I see the footage live of a missile coming down, and I can hear it on the phone. It's dropped blocks away from where they were. But you take your chances going with an evacuation company across Jordan to get to the Jordanian airport, at which point you don't know if the airspace will get shut down there or not. It may, and then you won't be able to get home. Luckily for those 9 people, they made it through. What is probably typically a 6-hour journey took them over 12 hours. It was kind of sketchy. I'm watching them on my phone, and sometimes that little blue dot would disappear, and then it would pop back up. They made it to the airport, and it took them 8 hours at the airport before they could get a flight from Jordan to Athens, and then Athens to Atlanta. So that was the first successful trip. After that, Florida's Grable unit and Governor DeSantis decided to use Florida's emergency management funds to pay to pull people out. And so about 3 days later, the first large batch of 300 Americans were able to take a bus into Jordan, but the airport was shut down there, so they had to be redirected to a ship, get on the ship, go to Cyprus, and then from Cyprus to Tampa, back to the US. And part of the reason why I'm telling this story is it made me think about what my dad was doing on the final days of the Vietnam War, pulling Americans out, landing on US aircraft carriers, shoving his Huey into the ocean, hopping on another Huey with a fellow pilot, going back into Saigon, pulling more people out back. It's wild, and part of history growing up, I learned about a Japanese man who was writing visas to secretly smuggle Jewish people out of Germany during World War II to get Jewish people to safety. And so history kind of repeats itself. I had the fortune of being able to just sit in my air-conditioned office, very safe, trying to get Americans back. But it's definitely something I would have never expected to do. So anyways, back to the King Bees. And so the training for the King Bee pilots started in the mid-60s. And with the draft, our military was very short on soldiers, which is why they instituted the draft. And you can imagine the desperation our military was at to make sure we had air superiority during the Vietnam War, to go to Vietnam and literally go to like rice paddies and just wherever and grab people that they visually think would make a good pilot. And some of these recruiters, they're 19, 20, 21 years old themselves. Luckily, my dad, who grew up with 8 brothers and sisters and a single mom, was chosen. I don't think he really understood what was going on, but he made it to America, ended up in Savannah, and they do a battery of tests. How quickly can you learn English? How good is your eye-hand coordination? And then you would get placed into a pilot program, and from there, you got more advanced training. And so he ended up with the 219th Flying Hueys in the Vietnam War. But the Vietnamese soldiers who ended up in Savannah, it was an interesting time. Back then, it wasn't until 1969 that interracial relationships were legal. It wasn't until 1969 that the Supreme Court ruled that you couldn't ban interracial relationships. So you can imagine these soldiers from South Vietnam in Savannah, the Deep South, trying to talk to the local town women. Wasn't the safest, brightest idea at the time, but it became crucial because that forced our military to learn how to build better cultural understanding and relationships. And Hunter's Air Force Base actually became a crucial spot for the Army to develop its plans and programs in integrating not just with the Vietnamese community, but any country that it was going to go and interact with. And so 50 years later, since the end of the Vietnam War, we can see the legacy of that with you all. Here today with the Vietnamese community and AVVBA, I think it's tremendous where we've gone from 1965 to 1975, the end of the Vietnam War, to today where the growth of the Southeast Asian community has been amazing. I did some historical research, and in Atlanta, off Buford Highway, around where Asian Square Market is, not too far from here, there was a large concentration of Hmong, Vietnamese, Cambodian, Laotians, and they were all in this weird, unknown status. Not legal to get Pell Grants and get loans to open up businesses, but not quite illegal either. They were just in this unknown status. So then in May 23rd of 1975, the Indochina Immigration and Migrant Assistance Act was passed, giving legal status, not citizenship status, but legal status to this community, allowing them to go get Pell Grants. My dad, we grew up in Ohio. I was born and raised in Ohio in 1976. But my dad ended up in Dayton, Ohio, along with probably a couple dozen Vietnamese pilots because of Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. everyone thought that they were going to end up in Dayton to fly experimental jets, because that's what Wright Pat was known for. None of them ended up being test pilots. They all ended up at General Motors. Yeah, because of that, so many Vietnamese, Cambodian, Laotian, Hmong, Southeast Asians across the country went from being in this vague, unknown status to having a legal status where they can get the Pell Grants to go to college, they can get the loans from banks to open up businesses. And we're almost, I think, $800 billion nationally in economic output that we provide for this country. And so I think that says a lot when you have a great synergy between America and countries that it's working with outside of America, and when those countries become immigrants within America. When I study the history of Asian Americans in Georgia, it's wild to me that I am now a state representative in the South, even though I was born and raised up north in Ohio. Went to Ohio State, Big Ten country, so not exactly friendly to the SEC, but yeah, we all love football, so we find that common ground. And so it's been an amazing time period. But we are also in a different world. And I had the opportunity in 2019 to go to Prague. And when I was in Prague, I went to what they called Little Ho Chi Minh City. In America, we have little Saigons across the country. Over in Eastern Europe, like Prague or Czechoslovakia, they have what they call little Ho Chi Minhs, and it was wild. Their perspective on the Vietnam War is completely opposite of my perspective on the Vietnam War. And I think our food's better. I didn't quite enjoy the pho in those areas the same. But you can see the communism thought. And the reason why those enclaves exist, like Sapa, is because during the Vietnam War, they actually took northern Vietnamese to Eastern Europe to work in factories. And part of the communist mentality is you live where you work. Very different from America, where you have your neighborhoods, and then where you work can be 50 miles away. And it's like a dorm. Everything is exactly the same. It's that communist mentality of everything is equal, everything is the same. And nothing had really changed. Those people still work in those same factories, and they send whatever they make from those factories to Russia. But as I was looking at how the end of the Vietnam War was celebrated across the world, I went to California and DC and got to speak at different commemorations for the end of the Vietnam War, as well as our own commemoration here in Georgia. The rest of the war kind of celebrates it a little bit different. And it's both concerning to me, but it's also kind of a wake-up call. We remember it as fighting for freedom and democracy. And of course, for the Vietnamese Communist government, they see it as a victory over imperialism, over a nation that was trying to take over their nation, not a nation that was protecting freedom and democracy. And that was very apparent if you take a look at how the Vietnamese politicians, consulates, went to Sapa and other areas of Eastern Europe to talk about and celebrate. For them, it's celebrating the end of the Vietnam War. They call it the reunification of their nation. And then you go to Australia, and you'll see both. You'll see the South Vietnamese commemorating the end of that war and the loss of a country, while across town you have consulate generals from Vietnam celebrating with another group of Vietnamese on the reunification. And I think we're going to start to see that happen more and more in America. As much as we try to fight it, the traditional ways of fighting it may have to change because our populations are growing older. A little more background on myself. I was born and raised in Dayton, Ohio. I went to Ohio State, and there was already a Vietnamese American Student Association that existed at Ohio State, and it's just a student org that celebrates being Vietnamese and shared experiences. And there was a university in Dayton called Wright State University, just down the street from Wright Pat. And the students who couldn't get into Ohio State from that southern western area of Ohio, Cincinnati, Dayton, even up to Toledo, would end up at Wright Pat. And so there was a small number of Vietnamese students, maybe a dozen, 12 or so. I worked with them to create a Vietnamese student organization at Wright State. And one of my uncles who still lives in that area told me, you need to go to the Wright State Vietnamese student page and take a look. And I went, and it was just a international Vietnamese student org page. I'm like, okay, that makes sense. International students come, they want to create their own club, that's fine. Looked everywhere, couldn't find the club that I had helped create over 30 years ago. And it's because the Vietnamese students there didn't have the financial support of the Vietnamese community. And the Vietnamese community in Dayton, Ohio is not very large, but we do have business owners that own nail salons, restaurants, but they didn't get the financial support that they needed. So eventually they faded away, especially after COVID. And so I'm watching videos and pictures of Tet celebration, New Year celebration of the International Vietnamese Student Group. And they're flying the Vietnamese Communist flag, which for me is infuriating. It's offensive. I'm like, how could a university and everything, I want to call up Wright State and complain, but we are America. We have freedoms that is protected, the freedom of speech. But that is a wake-up call to me that I have to talk to my Vietnamese elders and talk about the importance of the next generation of Vietnamese, whether it's their grandkids from my dad's generation or my own kids. I have a son that is going to be a senior in high school. He'll be off to whatever college he decides. I'm going to get a little bit political here. I don't intend to, but it's kind of a byproduct of what's going on in our country right now. The Vietnamese student group at Ohio State that I was a part of, and even at University of Georgia, is going to lose a lot of access to funding. And no matter your feelings on DEI, multicultural centers, minority student resources, they helped to prop many of these student groups. And so I don't know what the future is going to look like for these student groups, but what I do know is your stories, not just the Vietnamese, South Vietnamese stories, but also the Vietnam Veterans of America's stories. If they are quit being told, if we are no longer reminded of your stories, then we will soon forget about it all. And so, regardless of your political perspective on those areas, there is a preservation that has to happen, that we have to have on these college campuses to preserve the cultural identity and the memories of the South Vietnamese community and what the Vietnam War is. In a very long-winded roundabout way is what I'm saying is we must continue to commemorate the end of the Vietnam War as a loss of South Vietnam. I do not want to see celebrations in America that sees it as a reunification. That is what concerns me. And I can't, as a state rep, I can't create laws to ban the current Vietnamese flag or ban a celebration of reunification. That goes against our constitutional First Amendment of free speech. The way we combat it is through preserving our memories, our history, and supporting the next generation that is willing to preserve that, to continue to pass it on from student group presidents every year to the next. And so we still have challenges 50 years later. We have a lot to be proud of. As a Vietnamese community, you've seen us up in space as an astronaut, and I'm not talking about the very nice young lady who went up there recently. We had I'll just say, we had a real astronaut go up in space about 10 years ago. We've had a baseball player play in the MLB, Rick Graves. He played for the Cincinnati Reds. We had a Vietnamese man play for the Dallas Cowboys. We don't have a Vietnamese in the NBA yet. Maybe one day. We'll see. My son's 6 foot. He doesn't like basketball though, but we're getting taller. I remember growing up, everyone would go, "Oh, we hope our son grows as tall as Long." And now I see these kids who are far taller than I am, and my sons are taller than myself. So there's something great about the American nutrition and milk. But we, doctors, teachers, engineers, we was a South Vietnamese engineer who did the remodel of the Ford Mustang, an iconic American sports car, back in 1999. And we're in Congress now, and we're in your local state legislature. Here in Georgia, we've got 3 judges, we've got 2 city council, and of course me as the state rep. So the progress we have made has been tremendous, but we cannot sit back and just think that we're done. I think the fight needs to be passed on to the next generation. It's going to be very crucial. And as we see, I was talking with a gentleman earlier about the bombing of Iran. It was needed. It might not be the most popular thing for me to say, but after the bombing, Iran said, we took our 60% enriched uranium, and you guys didn't take it out. Well, you just admitted to the world that you have nuclear-grade uranium, so we're justified in the action we took. But I'm also very cognizant that we have a very young generation that is sick and tired of war. And it also comes from their parents. Their parents are the generation after mine, I'm Gen X, that fought in Desert Storm, that fought in a post-9/11 world. And as more and more information comes out, the justifications for those wars become very shaky, right? And so it's hard to fault the younger generation who, for them, they're seeing the ability to buy a house, get it out of their reach. They're seeing the debt coming out of college to be overburdensome. They're questioning the careers that they have. So I can't fault them for not wanting to end up in another war. But they also have to understand the realities of the world we live in, and that we do have folks that are adversaries to us. And this will lead me into my political stuff that I do. We passed the bill, but in its original incarnation of the bill, it was just written, no Chinese will buy land in Georgia. That meant any Chinese, even American citizens of Chinese descent. So me and a few other lawmakers, we fought. And you would think that it would be an easy fight that no one would put up, but it was quite a few weeks, but we finally got it narrowed down to what I think makes sense. We're only banning Chinese military and Chinese government officials from owning any land in the state of Georgia. And so that's what's passed. But that's the reality of the world we live in, is we're going to have Chinese international students who come, and we want them to come. We want the brightest, smartest in the world to come here, study here, and open up a business here, just like the CEO of NVIDIA. Right? We want the brains here. But we don't want Chinese military officials. We don't want Chinese government officials living here, spying on our farms, spying on our bases. I think today's news just said that we've arrested 2 Chinese national spies. And so that's the difficulty in the world we live in, is that there are good people we want for our country, while at the same time we have to protect our national interests. So that was one bill that I passed, and so I'm going to close out talking about some of the things we just finished with the last session, and that is the good news on the fiscal part. We passed a tax cut. We've accelerated a tax cut from 5.7, I think we've taken it down to 5.3, and that applies to the corporate rates as well. So if you're a business owner here in Georgia, you're getting a tax break as well, and that's going to be a tough one. We have a $16 billion surplus, which is both fantastic, but also for me, incredibly not good. Our Constitution requires us to have $5 billion surplus. I think we need to have a bigger surplus than that. But it's the government, and that surplus belongs to us, the taxpayers. And so even though reducing the income tax only means about $70 a year for the average Georgian taxpayer, it's still our tax dollars. It's not meant to sit in a savings account earning interest for the government. And so we've got a tax break coming. Well, actually, it hits today, July 1st. And then at some point later this year, you'll see a tax rebate check, depending on your filing status, of up to $500. And then we solidified the gas tax break that we had last winter. So those are good economic things that we've done for the taxpayers and voters. But on the federal government side, we use around $30 billion of federal government grants and initiatives, and they're being cut. If you go with the current bill, we're looking at a $20 billion cut. And that's going to change a lot of things. I think that will force us back into into session and make us recalculate how we do our budget. It might force us to recalculate those tax breaks that we're providing as well, because by our state constitution, we have to have a balanced budget, something I wish we would have at the federal level so that all of this craziness would not be an issue. But Georgia does have a balanced budget requirement in our Constitution, and if we lose $20 billion out of our budget, which is almost 20% of our budget, that's going to change a lot of things. And so we'll see. They're still arguing in DC over that bill. Did it pass? Okay, well, I know what I'm doing as soon as I leave here. I'll be going through those numbers and figuring out how much money Georgia's going to be losing. But there will be some changes that we have to face. I sit on the Arts and Entertainment Committee, which is Hollywood, technology and infrastructure. I come from a cybersecurity background, and so AI and cybersecurity is something we look at quite a bit. I'm not thrilled with this bill that's banning states from regulating AI. I think we know best what's the best means to protect our state. And then I also sit on the Environmental Committee, which I have no background in, but I've learned a lot. And so one of my concerns is that hurricane we had last year, Hurricane Helene, that took down large swath, just thousands of acres of trees in South Georgia, and that timber is still sitting on the ground. And luckily it's been a pretty wet summer, but if we hit a drought, that timber can turn into a fire, and then we have wildfires. And the interesting thing about Georgia is we have around 300 wildfires a year, but they only average an acre in size. And so that tells you how quickly we respond to those wildfires. We don't let them get out of control like in California. But the two planes we use to survey Georgia for wildfires have been cut by DOGE. So we don't have those planes anymore. And so we're going to be losing resources. I forgot the number, but we've lost a lot of park rangers. We've closed a bunch of parks. And so Georgia's going to change because of some of these cuts. And with this new bill, I expect more changes to be happening. So with that, I think I hit 20 minutes. I'll take some questions, and hopefully I didn't put anyone to sleep. Any questions? And you can ask me anything. You can ask me any policy questions or whether I think Ohio State will repeat as national champions. Yes, sir.
Is there a good network?
And just for a second, we have about 30 meals apparently that people didn't get served. They can bring those now, if it's okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is there a strong Vietnamese American community network nationally? Or is it really what we have in Georgia kind of independent of other states?
That's actually a Chami question. There is a national network. I think Chami was president or is still president of the National Vietnamese American Community. But I think Georgia GVAC is, an amazing organization and kind of helps set the bar for the rest of the country. Any other questions?
I've got a statement.
Yeah,
Can I make a statement?
absolutely. Here.
First, I got it. Well, maybe I don't. Thank you, sir. First off, Long Tran, thank you so much for speaking with us today. One of the things that I have noticed about, we've had a lot of immigrants come into our country over the last several years, and most of them come for welfare, seems like. The Vietnamese community that has come here over the years has been a great benefit to our country. And if we could get the quality of immigrants that have come in from Vietnam here from the rest of the world, we would be really, really better for it. And I want to thank you and for what you represent to our country in terms of being a Vietnamese American, and proud of it. And we're proud to have you here.
Thank you, sir. And I want to quickly close with, we're not California, we are Georgia. And so there are no undocumented immigrants in the state of Georgia that receives welfare assistance. We're not California.
Long before you sit down, on behalf of the AVVBA, traditionally, we, as a matter of thanks for your time and your enlightening words, first, allow me to give you this challenge coin.
Thank you.
It's two-sided, so either side you prefer. And thank you. Bob Babcock, the publisher, was up here talking about the book. This is the first one.
All right. Looking forward to reading it.
And I have a copy of the second one, should you want it as well. Okay? Thank you again.
Thank you.
Good seeing you.